Hi, I'm Michael Pilarski, and I'm touring around the Kauai and the Hawaii Islands looking at agroforestry systems. This is April and May in 2018, and I'm going to show you information about what agroforestry systems look like, what characterizes them during this short video, and I'm thrilled that I get to do it with my good friend Paul Massey, who is the manager and steward of this splendid Kauai food forest.
Well, thank you, Michael, and it's so great to have you back here on Kauai. You know, we owe you a really big debt of gratitude for helping us, setting us on the path of developing this Kauai food forest. Regeneration's Botanical Garden, which has been managing the food forest for the past 5.5 years, played a role in producing a 2009 permaculture design course. Michael has taught over 100 courses, and we set down the template for this food forest at that time. In 2012, our vision became a reality. In collaboration with Malama Kauai and the Sanctuary of Luboff, we established this 2-acre site. The mission of the food forest is to be an education space, a demonstration site of this kind of agroforestry system, the different techniques that Michael will guide us through today, and examples of this multi-story agroforestry system. And so, along with Marshall Paul and Rob Cruz, the other two managers of the site, I'm really proud to be with you here today. We love having visitors from local visitors as well as visitors from around the world who bring different perspectives. And that's another part of the special opportunity of having Michael here today, is to bring a fresh perspective to our techniques, which we're always evolving. And we're just grateful to be here with him today.
Okay, so here we are on the edge of the food forest, which is always different than the interior. There's always a lot more light coming in from the edge compared to the outside. And so here on the very opening edge, we have coleus and comfrey, some ground story, some nitrogen-fixing trees that is as nurse trees, Sesbania sesban, Gliricidia cipium or Madre de Cacao. And the big breadfruit here is the big future crop. So these nitrogen-fixing trees are supporting the big fruit-producing trees. We're going to go into the system now, and we'll show you what it looks like in the shadier interior. So come on in. Here we are a little ways into the food forest, and notice that there's more shade in here. We have shade on both sides, and we can see that there's an overstory and an understory, a middle story, and a ground story. We'll emphasize this more as we go along, but in this case, the overstory in a food forest you would expect would be food trees. So mainly we have, again, breadfruit trees, we have avocado trees, there's various Annonaceae fruits in the mix here, nitrogen-fixing trees, such as this one here. And so there's all these different stories. Some of them give immediate crop, some are supportive members of the play, so to speak. They all have their place here, but some are the ones that give us the value of the products that we're hauling off the site. The nitrogen fixers are only in the system for part of the time. It's part of the plant succession, which we'll refer to now and then. But we plant a lot of things at once, but over time the system matures and succession happens. And a lot of these early pioneer legume trees producing nitrogen for the whole system are eventually going to they get chopped back a lot of the time. Eventually some of them will even get removed. So we'll see that as we go along, and here's an example over here of a nitrogen fixing tree that's been chopped more recently, but that's going to regrow and then it will die back again, and then they'll cut it back again. So if they want to favor other things in the system, here's a cacao tree. There's a few cacao fruits even under here, and it really likes some shade. So having some of these things around it enable it to get going. So we don't plant things at really wide spacing like orchards do. we plant things a lot closer together in an agroforestry system. And I'd like to explain the swale system here a little bit. There's, I believe, 7 swales in the system, 6 or 7. Actually, there's 8, Paul tells me. So this swale here has got a, downhill is that way. Here is a berm, and then it's this big scallop here. There's a low trench, you might say, or a broad depression in the landscape on contour. So when all the rain that's running from up there comes down here, it forms a little pond, maybe about that deep, and gradually sinks into the ground to water all the plants around it. So this is a water harvesting and erosion control structure, a swale. And it's doing quite well here. I know they had a big flood recently. Many of you viewers may have known about the big Kauai flood, April 2018, and this area got a lot of rainfall and it didn't wash the system out. It worked really well. So proof that swales can help.
So just in reference to the swales that you just spoke of, we had a fantastic volunteer team. Mark Freeman from Heart and Soul Organics, Ray Maki from Permaculture Kauai, John Wareheim provided the laser sighting for proper on-contour swales, and Richard Kraft from the Sanctuary of Luboff all worked beautifully to put that hardscaping in first, designing the land to capture soil rather than allow it to erode out of the system, and it really has worked very well for us. In regards to the spacing of plants that you were talking about before, Michael, this is an opportunity for us to have a greater diversity of production as well as ultimately a greater yield overall, but it does take more management. If we just left these plants in a tighter spacing grow of their own accord, it would just be a tangled mess in a very short period of time. So if you're thinking about installing an agroforestry system, then you want to think about the amount of effort it's going to take. Of course, here in a community project like this with our hundreds of volunteers over the past 5.5 years, we've been able to keep pace with the rampant growth. But of course, when you're cutting it back, you have all of that chop and drop material, mulch essentially, that we lay around the fertility zone of the trees, which enhances the health of the plants, the health of the system, increasing that organic matter content. And so the overplanting of an agroforestry system, when properly managed, really does help the overall health and productivity of the system.
Yeah, I'd like to mention syntropic agriculture. Ernst Gausch in Brazil has a fantastic agroforestry system, only his is like 1,000 acres now. Huge spread. This is 2 acres, and it's a little bit older, and he's convinced, and he's convincing the world that agroforestry systems with a lot of chop and drop actually are the fertilizer inputs. You basically grow your own fertilizer inputs and the system bootstraps itself up higher and higher in productivity, drawing on the resources already there. So that's a great, this is an example of that. So let's go and look at one of these biomass areas. This area here, notice they've just chopped and dropped a whole lot of leafy material, coleus, comfrey. These are both high production biomass plants that you can use for mulch and to feed the plant. So you use it to control weeds, feed the plant, and actually control the ground story to some extent. So you have to hack things back a bit here. This is a noni plant replacing something that came out. So it's going to fill this space along with a few other choice trees in here. And so besides this ground story, here's a good example of lower story, middle story, upper story. This tree can get a lot bigger. But just to illustrate the concept, here's our real low story here, and notice the biomass in here. And then this is a moringa tree, and we'll have Paul say a few things about the moringa tree, because the moringa is one of the superfoods of our times. And if you live in if you can grow moringa trees, I know people on the Canadian border growing moringa trees in pots on their porch. Tell us about moringa, Paul.
Well, Moringa oleifera, originally from India, very popular with Filipino growers for many years, and now finally the rest of us through that awareness and influence of the many cultures that come together in the Hawaiian Islands, have begun to focus on the importance of this plant for its nutritive values. Incredibly high in vitamins, good for people with malnutrition, an excellent plant, and a good example for us here of the biodiversity and the importance of these varieties. These varieties came from Ted Radovich's program at the University of Hawaii's College of Tropical Agriculture. 7 different experimental crosses to determine a variety with the best leaf characteristics, and they, amongst all the rest of the plants in the food forest, over 200 varieties of and species of useful plants. The Kauai Food Forest serves as a living seed bank. Many of these plants are propagated vegetatively, as moringa can be, although it is also regularly propagated from seeds. We can take this material, whether it be cuttings, divisions, or seeds, and spread them out throughout the community, making sure that these important varieties, some of them which are rare and disappearing in other landscapes, can come back into common use.
So one of the big principles of agroforestry systems is biodiversity, crop diversity. And with 200 species and varieties in here, this is a good system. A lot of people don't get up to 200 species. But this is the kind of thing you aim for in a good food forest. Diversity on the ground story, upper story, etc., etc. This is not only a food forest, it becomes a medicinal forest. A lot of things that are edible are actually medicinal. So we have an edible, medicinal, timber, a dye, perfumes, plants for weaving and thatching, etc., etc. It is far more than just a food forest. This is a multiple products agroforestry system with a focus on fruit. So at any rate, let's go and check out the next spot and look at some bigger biodiversity chunks here. So one of the things about agroforestry systems is that they are great for carbon sequestration. The plants themselves are carbon, all their roots in the ground, and these trees are going to have a lot of roots under there. That's all carbon sequestration. There's a lot of leaf drop, gradual humus buildup. The microorganisms carry that organic matter deeper into the soil. But one of the big ways we have carbon in this system is the chop and drop. And so here's, mulching on top of a sugar apple here. And here's some bigger chunks of wood. Notice that we have actual trunks, and you'll find this throughout the system. You can't see a lot of it under the trees, but there are a lot of woody materials in the system on the ground, decaying gradually. And notice, it might be a little hard to see there, but here's a mushroom or a polypore that's digesting the wood. Here's another mushroom right here. But there are a lot of fungi in the system as a result of having all this chop and drop. You won't get this in a vegetable garden. Fungi need woody material to live, and they're excellent at catching nutrients. So having a lot of fungal network in this system means it's harder to leach out the minerals from the high rainfall here. So this is sequestering carbon, it's producing mulch, it's improving the fungal component. And if we look over under this tree here again, you'll see that there's a lot of smaller woody material, green material, and as you go down, there's just a whole network. And once I get down here, there's tons of life scuttling around under here. We won't be able to pick that up. At any rate, take my word for it. The soil is dark and rich and friable. You can, bring up a bunch of that. So there's a nice mix of soil with a lot of organic matter in it there. So that is holding nutrients. It's full of life and biodiversity. A level of the biodiversity is just the microbes in the system, the fungi, etc., etc. There's more. You have 200 species in the overstory, in that you had, who knows, maybe hundreds or thousands of species in that handful.
Indeed, indeed. And so, when we started this project, Michael, this was a field. It was a mowed grass field. And so because we knew that we were going to establish a woody plant system, we really need to inject a lot of organic matter with that woody component into the system. So while we grew much of this woody material as our nitrogen fixing trees, We're also been very resourceful in terms of bringing in wood chips from other projects, cutting these ironwood logs and bringing them in as a border planting, which is very helpful in our management strategy. We want to be bringing in material that can help make that transformation as well, along with the root systems, that the surface layer, as quickly as possible, is going into that fungal digestion, and we get that more diversity of mushrooms growing in the system. And if you're doing a similar project, being resourceful about bringing in those kind of materials, they're really all over in a tropical landscape. Going out, making sure that they don't have any invasive species like ants or other problematic things, but then sort of stockpiling them and doing these in-place compost systems right around the fertility zone where the trees are looking for their nutrition, right at the edge of the drip line, as they say, has definitely helped us leap forward in terms of the quantity and the quality of micro and macroorganisms that cycle the nutrients and really make this kind of a system healthy.
Yeah, not bad for a mowed pasture a few years back. Some people start their agroforestry systems, like I was just on the island of Hawaii, and I saw places where people want an agroforestry system, but there's a lot of invasive tree jungle there. So they have to cut back the guava, cut back the tulip trees, cut back all these weedy species, and then plant the things they want. And so they start with a lot of trunk wood, a lot of big biomass. So you have to bring it in more in a system where you're starting from scratch. But some systems, it's either on site or next door to the site. So just use, don't burn anything, or very little at any rate. Bring it and use it as fertilizer in the system. All biomass is fertilizer. What I like to say is that carbon and tree trunks and all this stuff is like money in the bank. It will yield with interest.
We're standing in front of a specially built cage to protect one of our most important plant diversity resources here amongst many in the Kauai food forest. This is Mokambo, the jaguar tree, Theobroma bicolor. Not an uncommon tree in Central and South America, but rare here in the Hawaiian Islands. The source of the material originally from John Mood, and then passing through a gift from Oliver Cohen, who lives here in the Kilauea area, gifted to both us and the Princeville Botanical Garden. We're establishing a breeding pair of these trees. Important for them to have cross-pollination, so we've put a couple of them next to each other. Like the cacao tree, they do well with some shade in the beginning of its growth. This tree is just about to top out of our shade structure, and we've removed the shade on its companion. And again, an opportunity to introduce our community to a new kind of fruit with a unique taste and probably unique applications. It's said that the butter that's made from this cacao relative is superior even to cacao butter from the more familiar cacao tree, Theobroma cacao. Indeed.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So yes, we do take special measures with some of our trees, and again, like a succession, because this is mimicking an overstory, which we had cut down by the time that we planted this. This was not planted in the beginning of the system. So we've simulated an overstory. We'll be removing it, and we're very hopeful to have seeds to share with the community in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. And notice the shade tree to the side here that will be producing some of the shade for this tree in the long run. This is ice cream bean, Inga, and it has these big long pods that have like this ice cream like substance in there. Not really quite like ice cream, but it's edible, tasty, and it's a nitrogen fixing tree. It grows really fast. In some places they just use this as the nurse crop and keep hacking it back. But in this case, it can be a shade tree for your special bicolored chocolate here.
Yes,
Yeah.
Indeed. With these kind of multi-purpose trees, we have a lot of options. We could let it grow for the fruit production. We could keep it, we could chop it way back and consider, even remove it, and consider that it's been improving the soil right beneath its feet for the next productive plant. We could also cut it back, utilize the material for chop and drop, and use the structure of that tree then as a trellis. A lot of different options. We haven't decided exactly what we're going to do with this ice cream bean, but that's kind of the fun of these systems, is that the utility of the plants really reveal themselves through time. And as long as you lay out the template in a good way, you're going to have a lot of options for the future.
And you have ice cream that won't melt in the subtropical heat. Okay, onward. Well, if we're going to have ice cream on the trees, we might as well have some vanilla. Let's talk a little bit about vines on trees. One of the stories, you might say, in an agroforestry system is the vine component. It starts at the ground story, goes up. We grow the trellises instead of building the trellises.
You know, every plant in the food forest has a story where it came from, and we want to thank Jill Richardson, one of our very involved volunteers at the beginning of the food forest, for gifting us this vanilla vine. You know, the parent vine was actually destroyed by a bulldozer about a year later. So again, an important storehouse for biodiversity and these storied plants. Vanilla is flowering at this time of year. It's just kind of ending its flowering period. And our volunteer, Natalie Erminska, has been out here every day hand-pollinating the vanilla beans. So we see successful pollination has occurred when these tubes, see, this one didn't actually expand, but the fact that these are growing shows you that we'll have beautiful vanilla coming up. And Trellisdona gluricidia, a plant that's been very important for us for biomass, but as Michael said, as the forest gets shadier, these plants are going to be less productive in terms of their leaf output, but they do form a very solid structure for vining plants. And so we've planted a number of different species of perennial vining plants on our gluricidia. We'll take a look at some more of them in a little while. And just a great way to be mindful of the succession of the forest and get productivity on this layer. We could have this vanilla vine growing on a long-term fruit tree and not only get the fruit from the tree, but also get the vanilla beans from within its canopy.
I love their little holdfasts here. Yeah. This bird here is an example that the food forest becomes a haven for biodiversity of birds and arthropods and other species. Birds especially, you'll have more nesting, habitat, food sources, and so it's way better for birds to have this than it is to have a pasture. And you notice that they also put out fertilizer. You provide purchase for birds, and bird poop is one of the best sources of phosphorus. So if you want to, and we're short on phosphorus in Kauai, so you bring in the birds, you bring in phosphorus and other nutrients.
And this is, of course, our beloved white-rumped shama, the most beautiful songbird of the Hawaiian landscape, and a great friend to the gardener and forester, always waiting for us to turn up some organic matter or dig in the soil so they can jump in there and grab an earthworm or some of the arthropods that might be present in the soil. So this is a wonderful relationship we get to have with this species.
Amen. Okay, here we are, and again, another part of the food forest. Here's another nurse tree, pink powder puff, another nitrogen-fixing tree. And notice the overstory here. We have some vines actually running up into that tree. We have bananas in the landscape here and down below. And above us, I see the biggest tree in the food forest that I've seen, and it's beautiful feathery foliage. We'll have to have Paul introduce that tree. And then further back, if you look way back into the background, there's a lot of albizia trees, what they call albizia here, which is a non-native tree that grew up after Hurricane Iniki in '92. So that's 26-year-old trees in the background. They are gigantic. That are considered a hazard and an invasive plant here, but the nutrients from that can help feed the system. If some of those trees can be cut back eventually. Don't do this at home, folks, but they are gradually reducing albizia in the landscape, and they can help feed our our nitrogen fixing, they can help fix nitrogen for our systems here. Here's some more ground cover system, and I particularly like to point out that there's taro in here, you know, the comfrey again, a lot of sweet potato. Sweet potato is nitrogen fixing and produces edible foliage and produces tubers in the ground. And this one here is the native Ko'oko'olau, a bidden species. And this is really treasured by the Hawaiians and by others, new Hawaiians as well, for its medicinal aspects. So this is one of the most popular medicinal teas native to Hawaii. We're here to talk a little bit about all this disturbed earth here. You can see it's all torn up and dirt exposed. Could then run in a case of a storm or extra water. But what's going on here, Paul? This is one of your problems in the system.
Sure. Well, here we have pig damage, rooting pigs looking for predominantly earthworms in the system. And because we have built up the soil, we do have this high organic matter soil. And it does contain a lot of life that the pigs like to vacuum up. So anybody doing an agriculture project needs to have allies in the hunting world. In some way, we need to either trap, shoot, or otherwise control these pigs, which of course are a very important food resource for the people of the Hawaiian Islands. It's something that we don't need to eliminate, we need to keep in balance. And we want to thank Nikolai Barka, another early Foodforest volunteer and designer activist in the system. He comes back on occasion and he does some very targeted hunting, very professional technique that he uses. And it seems that when we reduce the population by just 1 or 2 pigs, they move off to a different area. But really, pigs are part of the environment in the same way that albizia is part of the environment too. Now, we wouldn't have planted this tree on purpose, but in agriculture, we look at some of these invasive plants as a resource, and in permaculture as well. It's always good to think about the problem as the solution. And while albizia radically changes the chemistry of the soil, which is bad for native plant habitats, it's actually quite good for agricultural landscapes. So we need to learn how to control these invasive plants and utilize them to the best of their resources. They are being harvested on the south shore and east shore of the island to feed a bioenergy plant. And very recently on the island of Oahu, there's an example of how this wood can be used for construction. A graduate student from the University of Hawaii doing that pioneering work. So we need to work on figuring out how to continue to bring these Hawaiian Island ecosystems into balance. And certainly if we view albizia and pigs as a resource, they can stop being so much of a problem in our heads and more the answer, the solution to problems of hunger, nutrient scarcity in the system, and really through that appreciation we can go forward with a sense of positivity and optimism. Now, Michael mentioned this tree, and it is the largest tree in the forest, or the tallest. This is an emergent canopy tree in our system, and this is the nita bean. This is Parkia timoriensis from Indonesia. Like its more familiar cousin, the Parkia speciosa, it has clusters of large beans that are harvested when they're green, shelled, and the beans inside the pods are high protein beans with a very distinctive flavor.
So here is a mountain apple, a syzygium, one of the many edible syzygiums. Look at the size of the fruit on this. Beautiful color. The tree is loaded with them in there. Lots of production and beautiful tree. You can see the nice foliage in the spring. It's really light colored. So another one of the many fruiting plants here at the Kauai Foodforest. Yeah, grow more tropical fruit. You should have tropical fruit growing year-round harvest. No excuse not to, if you live in Hawaii. Looking at the Sacha incha tree, Sacha inchi, which I'd never heard of before. And I study tropical fruits and nuts, and so it's like, wow, a new one. And so this one is from Brazil, and it's a euphorbia family, which means it has some caustic properties. So you have to roast the nuts before eating them. And it's growing up a Gliricidia tree as a support trellis. So again, this is a vine, showing us the vine component. And here is some of the seed pods and the little nut. So you can roast that, and then there'll be a little nut inside. So here's another food plant, vine, trellised on another Gliricidia tree. Big leaves, really healthy looking growth. And here's one of the fruits. This thing really, it's called chayote, and it really pumps out the fruit. There's quite a few of them in there, and these are long-lived. And so once you have them in the yard, you can just plant this, just set it on the ground. It'll send out a shoot and grow. So this is propagation material as well as food. You cook it generally, you know, it's a food that you cook. It's sort of starchy, but it's just an easy to grow starchy food for the subtropics, almost bomb-proof. I see that in the system there's quite a bit of taro in here, and I know Paul collects taro, or kalo as it's called in Hawaiian. So this is the most important food plant for the Hawaiian people. So here is a large passion fruit. It's a special species of giant passion fruit or giant lilikoi, and it has different flavor, but again, a good edible fruit. Beautiful foliage, leaf, and again, here's a vine again growing on a Gliricidia that's been chopped back. So it's the framework for the vine, and beautiful flowers. And again, they can be used in medicine as well as the leaves and the vine of this. So this is a medicinal plant and a food plant vine in the system. Here's a Rollinia tree, and I just love this family of plants. It's the Annonaceae. There's cherimoya, atamoya, custard apple, sugar apple. There's quite a few, and it's also the ylang-ylang trees in that family. But look at the size of this fruit, and soursop. I have to mention soursop. So this isn't quite ripe yet. It'll get a little yellower, but there's quite a few of them in here. Here's another one. Oh my gosh, this tree is loaded, mainly on the lower branches right now. But again, it can't be older than, you know, like 6 years old. And look at the size of the trunk back there. They have to keep cutting it back and pruning it to keep it down a little bit. But also really notice the ground story. This is what happens in a mature agroforestry under a particularly shady tree like this one. There's no more ground cover under it. It's just leaf litter, bit of chop and drop down there, and I see mushrooms popping up. But I don't have a weed pressure here anymore. The tree has, you might say, mulched itself with its shade and with the biomass. And so I don't have to worry about weeding it anymore, you might say. So some of these overstory trees create a dense shade. Some create a light shade. There's a lot of diversity. But these are big leaves. This is a robust tree. And here we are under one of the biggest banana clumps I've seen in a while. Amazing. So this was only planted in 2013. It's not very old, but when you talk about carbon sequestration, you can see there's a lot of biomass here, and it produces a lot of bananas as well. And Rob Cruz pointed out to me recently that when he chops and drops some of the old stems, they're filled with worms coming up those leaf shafts. So it's also worm habitat. And so you want to say a few things about this banana clump here? Why it's so big, Paul?
Sure. So back in 2013, we actually planted over 40 varieties of bananas at the Foodforest. We soon discovered, though, that there was a productivity difference hugely between the different varieties. We also are challenged, as many places on Kauai are, with the banana bunchy top virus. We lost numerous of our varieties to that scourge of the banana grower. But we have a handful that are really, we've discovered through that large planting, really the bomb-proof varieties. This particular one, the tall Namwa from Thailand, the most important commercial variety in the country of Thailand, and produces enormous racks. Like Michael said, it's a big biomass generator, and one of the most important things is chopping and dropping and feeding our other productive plants. It makes a nice border of fertility around the fertility zone. And this plant here, resistant to pest and disease. It's got a unique flavor, and so one of the nice things of planting many varieties is you see the ones that are really going to produce well in your environment. We've helped to spread this particular variety along with the dwarf Namwa, just a smaller statured one, but also huge racks of bananas throughout the community. And we want to thank Tom Baldwin for providing this material for us, as well as Coconut Chris on the Big Island, who is a long-term steward of the banana patch where it came from, a great conservator of bananas, many rare varieties. And so again, the whole community of the Hawaiian Islands coming together to provide plant material for the Kauai Food Forest so it can continue to serve as a living seed bank for similar projects around the island, whether they be backyard gardeners, commercial farms, or other community projects conserving these important food varieties and making them available to the community.
And this can seed out to other agroforestry systems in Kauai and into other places. As you can see, this is sort of an international gene bank, and we can create these composite bits of paradise from different parts of the world coming together. For instance, the big tree here on my right is the Brossimum elicastrum, or the breadnut tree from Central America. It has fed hundreds of thousands and millions of Mayan people over the centuries. And now it's here to provide bread nuts for us. And on this side here, we have mamaki, which is a native Hawaiian plant. So we always like to mix Hawaiian native plants along with these useful, productive exotics to bring in native flora and provide habitat for them. So this is a wonderful medicinal plant. Again, mamaki is one of the most used medicinal herbs in Hawaii in the nettle family. And they have little white berries in here on the stem that you can eat. So it's a food plant as well. So we're going to leave for now this little garden of biodiversity, the Kauai food forest, and we want people out there to make millions of more food forests.
Thank you, Michael. It's been great walking through with you. And we want to thank Yanji, who's behind the camera, always shining a light and giving a voice to community through his inspired work. So thank you so much, Yanji, for getting this out to the community. And we want to invite people to come to the Food Forest. We're here each and every Saturday from 8:30 until 5. You can find us on the web at kauaifoodforest.org. We're really looking forward to community coming out and sharing what you know and learning about the concepts of soil building, biodiversity conservation, and so many other topics that are important to food production here in the Hawaiian Islands. And so I want to say aloha and mahalo nui loa for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for joining me. Thank you, Yanji, for making the film. And I'm Michael Pilarski, Friends of the Tree Society, and I have a lot more YouTubes on the web on agroforestry systems, mostly in the temperate zones. But friendsoftheTrees.net. FriendsoftheTrees.net is my website. I hope to see you down the agroforestry trail.
Aloha.
Aloha.